Langford family eruption. On December 9, 2019, the Langford family from North Sydney, Australia, boarded the Royal Caribbean cruise ship Ovation of the Seas for a 16-day birthday voyage celebrating Anthony's 51st year. When the ship docked at the port of Tauranga, New Zealand, Anthony, his wife Christine, 46, and their children, 19-year-old Jesse and 17-year-old Winona, joined a shore excursion to Whakaari, also known as White Island, an active stratovolcano rising from the ocean 48 kilometers offshore. The company operating the tours had failed to provide cruise passengers with any meaningful health and safety information. Tourists were handed helmets and gas masks, told the island was at volcanic alert level 2, and given no further warning. The four Langfords hiked into the crater, took photographs near the vents, and were making their way back toward the jetty when at exactly 2:11 in the afternoon, the volcano erupted without warning. A hydrothermal steam explosion sent a lateral blast of superheated ash, gas, and boulders the size of people across the crater floor. The family turned and ran. Jesse was knocked to the ground and curled into a ball. Anthony and Christine were engulfed and sustained catastrophic burns. Winona disappeared in the explosion and was never found, her body believed washed into the ocean. 3 civilian helicopter pilots arrived first and began evacuating the injured. Official rescue teams did not reach the island for 2.5 hours. Jesse was airlifted to Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney, where he underwent more than 18 surgeries for burns covering over 70% of his body. Anthony and Christine both died from their injuries. 22 people died in total. Jesse, still hospitalized and unable to attend in person, had a eulogy read aloud to 700 mourners at his family's joint funeral while he watched via live stream from his hospital bed. WorkSafe charged 6 companies with health and safety violations, and courts awarded over 10 million New Zealand dollars in reparations. Whakaari has been permanently closed to land-based tourism. Will Norton tornado. On the morning of May 22, 2011, 18-year-old Will Norton attended his high school graduation ceremony at Missouri Southern State University in Joplin, Missouri. He had just received his diploma and had been accepted to Chapman University's film school in California. After the ceremony, local channels were issuing tornado warnings, but many in Joplin did not anticipate the severity of what was approaching. Will's father, Mark, quickly ushered his son into the car to drive home. Will's sister, Sarah, and their aunt were in a separate vehicle ahead of them and made it home safely. At approximately 5:34 in the afternoon, an EF5 tornado touched down just west of Joplin, with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour and a track nearly 1 mile wide, barreling east through the densely populated southern portion of the city. Mark and Will were caught directly in its path. The suction force tore Will out of the vehicle. Mark survived. Will was swept upward and carried away. Search efforts began immediately, but thousands were unaccounted for in the aftermath. On May 27th, his remains were discovered in a pond not far from where the tornado had struck. Debris accumulated over the surface of the water had concealed him from rescuers. Will Norton was pronounced dead from injuries consistent with the tornado. He was 18 years old and had held his diploma for just a few hours. The 2011 Joplin tornado killed 158 people directly, injured more than 1,100, and remains the deadliest tornado in the United States since 1947. Joplin High School established a scholarship in Will's name, and Chapman University placed him on their memorial wall alongside others lost that day. Campfire wildfire. At approximately 5:30 in the morning on November 8, 2018, a fatigued metal hook on a Pacific Gas and Electric transmission tower near Polga, California, failed during strong downslope winds, causing the power line to arc and drop molten metal onto dry vegetation below. Investigators later confirmed the company had identified the hook as a failure risk and had not repaired it. Driven by winds exceeding 35 miles per hour and the driest November conditions on record, the campfire exploded through the canyon and reached the town of Paradise in under 2 hours. Emergency alerts went out at approximately 8 in the morning, but fewer than 30% of residents received them. Herbert Alderman, 80 years old, was at his home at 5775 Deanna Way in Paradise. A severely sprained ankle had left him unable to self-evacuate. When he realized the fire was approaching, Alderman made multiple phone calls to friends asking someone to come and get him. The fire moved faster than anything the town had seen. First responders were overwhelmed by thousands of simultaneous calls. Evacuation routes gridlocked. Paradise was struck from 3 sides by massive walls of fire. No rescue reached Herbert Alderman. He was found deceased inside his home. The Butte County District Attorney's investigation report documented his death directly, noting his mobility limitation and the calls he made seeking help before the flames arrived. The campfire killed 85 people in total. the deadliest wildfire in California history. 59 of the 73 identified victims were 65 or older. Pacific Gas and Electric was charged with 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter and pleaded guilty to all of them, paying $13.5 billion in settlements to wildfire victims. Real quick, if you find this informative, I cover stories like these regularly. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see more. Now back to the video. Miki Endo tsunami. Miki Endo was born on July 18, 1986, in the coastal fishing town of Minami-Sanriku in Miyagi Prefecture, Japan. She joined the town hall as a public servant in 2007, and by 2010 was working in the crisis management department, where her role was to operate the town's public loudspeaker network and broadcast disaster warnings to the town's 17,000 residents. She had recently married when, at 2:46 in the afternoon on March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake ruptured a fault 130 kilometers offshore. Miki Endo immediately took her seat at the broadcast desk on the second floor of the three-story Crisis Management Center and began urging residents to flee to higher ground. She broadcast continuously for approximately 30 minutes as the warning escalated and roughly 40 municipal workers scrambled to the building's rooftop. The town's 18-foot seawall offered no protection. At approximately 3:21 in the afternoon, a wall of water 16 meters high struck Minami-Sanriku. It crushed wood frame houses, breached the seawall entirely, and submerged the three-story building to its roof. Miki Endo's broadcasts abruptly stopped. Of the approximately 40 people on the rooftop, only 11 survived by clinging to the building's steel antenna while floodwaters swirled around them for hours. Miki Endo was not among them. Her body was recovered on April 23, 2011, 43 days after the disaster. Her broadcasts are credited with prompting thousands of residents to evacuate in time. Survivor Taiza Haga, 61 years old, later told Endo's mother that he had heard her daughter's voice the entire drive to higher ground, and that voice was the reason he was alive. The recovered microphone was found still pointed toward the town. The skeletal red steel frame of the crisis management building stands today as a permanent memorial. Ruthven family landslide. Shane Ruthven, 43, and his wife Katie, 34, had built what Katie's father described as the American dream along the banks of the North Fork Stillaguamish River in Oso, Washington. The couple ran Mountain Lion Glass together and lived with their sons Hunter, 6, and Wyatt, 4, in a converted A-frame home with 150 feet of river frontage. Shane had recently convinced his mother, Judy, 64, and her husband, Lou, 71, a Marine Vietnam veteran, to move from Spokane to a trailer on the adjacent property to be near their grandchildren. 3 generations of one family were living side by side. The hillside above Steelhead Haven had a documented history of instability, going back to 1937. Geologists had explicitly warned of catastrophic potential, particularly after a significant slide in 2006. Rainfall in the weeks prior had reached 150 to 200% of the historical average. No evacuation warnings were issued. At 10:37 in the morning on March 22, 2014, the saturated hillside gave way. Approximately 18 million tons of sand, till, and clay thundered down at roughly 40 miles per hour. A neighbor who survived described the sound as a jetliner making an emergency landing in the valley. The debris field buried both the Ruthven home and the Vandenberg trailer under 20 to 80 feet of mud and debris. Shane, Katie, Hunter, Wyatt, Lou, and Judy were all killed simultaneously. Fire chaplain Joel Johnson, one of the first responders, later described the Ruthvens and Vandenbergs as the single-family unit that lost the most loved ones in the entire disaster. The 2014 Oso landslide killed 43 people and remains the deadliest single landslide in United States history. Survivors and victims' families later settled with the state and a timber company for $60 million combined. Sinzig flood deaths. In the second week of July 2021, a slow-moving, low-pressure system named Bernd stalled over western Germany and released rainfall the German Weather Service described as the highest in more than 100 years in some areas. In a single day, parts of Rhineland-Palatinate received a full month's average rainfall. The Ahr Valley, a narrow, gorge-like wine region southwest of Bonn, was among the hardest hit. The Lebenshilfe House in the town of Sinzig, located near the banks of the Ahr River, was an assisted living facility for residents with physical and cognitive disabilities. As the river began rising dramatically on the evening of July 14th, no evacuation was ordered. That same evening, a German police helicopter crew filmed the length of the Ahr Valley between 10:14 and 10:44 at night, capturing footage of homes already submerged and people waving urgently from rooftops in the dark. The footage was never forwarded to local emergency management authorities. The Ahr, normally just 1 meter deep, rose to nearly 8 meters overnight, far exceeding the official extreme flood scenario maps. In the overnight hours, floodwaters inundated the ground floor of the Lebenshilfe house. The 12 residents, whose disabilities prevented independent evacuation, were trapped in their rooms as the water rose. All 12 drowned. Their deaths were confirmed by the Koblenz Public Prosecutor's Office as part of its investigation into the broader disaster. The flood killed 134 people in the Ahr Valley and 190 across all of Germany, more than the total flood deaths in Germany during the entire preceding 40-year period. A state parliament investigation later confirmed the helicopter footage had never been shared with local authorities, triggering a major political scandal. Had it been acted upon, the evacuation of the Lebenshilfe house could have been ordered hours before the water arrived. Katrina's surge death. On the morning of August 29, 2005, as Hurricane Katrina made landfall along the Gulf Coast, Tonette Waltman Jackson, 46, and her husband Hardy were sheltering inside their home in Biloxi, Mississippi. As the storm surge swept inland, the couple retreated to their attic. The surge reached heights of up to 28 feet along parts of the Mississippi coastline. The floodwaters struck the Jackson home with such pressure that the house was split completely in half. Both Tonette and Hardy were swept into the churning water. Hardy grabbed hold of a nearby tree and clung to it as the surge swirled around him. Tonette was pulled away in the torrent. His final exchange with her came in that moment, as she told him he could not hold on and asked him to take care of the kids and the grandkids. Hardy survived. Tonette was carried miles from their home. In September of 2005, a search and rescue team discovered unidentified remains between the rubble of 2 destroyed homes in St. Martin, several miles east of Biloxi. Investigators determined the remains belonged to a black woman, likely in her 50s, but could develop no further leads. The case went cold for nearly 2 decades. A headstone bearing only the name Jane Love was placed at Machpelah Cemetery in Pascagoula. Hardy Jackson searched for answers until his death in 2013. Then, in May of 2024, 19 years after the storm, forensic genetic genealogy testing by the company Othram finally identified the remains as Tonette Waltman Jackson. She was reinterred with her name restored, and her family received the closure Hardy had spent a lifetime seeking. Hurricane Katrina killed approximately 1,836 people and remains the deadliest hurricane to strike the Gulf Coast since 1928. Thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, subscribe so you don't miss our uploads. See you next time.